Okay, so welcome to Fleet Logi 102. This is going to be a sort of an advanced class. I'll be covering, I've got like 3 main sections, but I'll be covering a lot of different topics within. From a mostly advanced point of view, like small tips and tricks you can do to be better at flying Logi, or better at organizing, or just better at understanding the Logi ships and some of the game mechanics. But questions, I'm going to be like saying the next point or next section, and that's a good place to stop me, or just write your questions in Fleet Chat if you want to ask anything. We can do some Q&A in the end as well, but it's going to be sort of jumping from topic to topic. So the outline, the 3 big sections is going to be fleet essentials, then fleet organizing and Logi anchor point of view, some topics. And then lastly, there's going to be like quick tips and some mathematics section. This is mostly going to be fleet oriented, and it's mostly Osprey Basilisk oriented. Some of the things, and sometimes I'll mention some small gang stuff, and some of this applies to all generally Logi, but the focus is mainly Bassi Osprey fleet and like medium large size fleets. Okay, so let's start with fleet essentials. And the first part is broadcast settings. Generally, people say that you should color code broadcast settings. Like broadcast history, I'm going to broadcast for Shield right now. I think by default they're fairly colored already, so that's fine. And generally, people say you should turn off target broadcast as Logi. I sort of have like 2 takes on this. If I'm the Logi anchor and it's not like a super big fleet, like 200 plus, then I really like having target broadcasts on, because from that you can interpret how the fight is going. If you see target broadcasts moving really fast, then that's most probably because you're actually killing enemy DPS, which means, for example, their DPS will be dropping, or they might be switching DPS to tackle and stuff, and then, for example, it might become a good idea to fly after your tackle to give reps on them. But also, if it's a small fleet, like 20 people, maybe 30 people, then you should probably carry damaged drones, and then your damage might be relevant as well, so you might want DPS drones there as well as just a regular Logi pilot. But yeah, generally, if you're not the LC, I'd have target broadcasts off in bigger fleets. So next topic is going to be watch list. You all probably know about a couple of months back we had the miraculous feature of watch list colors, I mean, which is really nice. And one of the nice features about this is someone pinged me. One of the nice features is that the colors persist from fleet to fleet. So for example, if I use white for FCs, so if I set Vaur as white, then he's pretty much going to be white in every watch list I put him on, and he's usually the FC, so I don't need to recolor him. But for Logi and some snowflakes, sometimes the colors change. So if you're in a completely cruiser fleet like Moas and Ospreys, then you might want to check that the people who you have colored for Logi, for example, green or blue or whatever you use, that if they're actually no longer in Logi, you should uncolor them for that fleet. So next thing is how to add people to that, how to add snowflakes to the watch list. In a really small fleet, if it's like a small gang, 10 or 15, you should really have everyone on the watch list. So people don't need to broadcast for reps as much. They can focus on other things. And you don't have to really prioritize adding anyone there. But if it's like a really big fleet, like 200 persons, you're gonna have a Logi anchor, maybe 2 captain buddies, then DPS anchor, maybe 2 DPS anchor backups, then like maybe 4 Hugins or something. So it's gonna be pretty long. And if we make an MOTD list, for example, in Logi Braid channel, then you can easily add them to the watch list. But what you shouldn't really do is just alphabetically add them or whatever list they're in. There's obviously some very important snowflakes like Logi anchors and FCs. And if you have only one Saber or only one Hugin, then you should really watch list them. But if it's a long list, you should do a sort of a randomized selection from them. If the snowflakes list is, for example, 10, you realistically probably only have space for 5 or 6. So you should perhaps take the first one or the last one and some random ones in between to make sure at least someone from Logi has all the snowflakes listed. There's 2 ways to watchlist people as far as I'm aware. You can right click and add them to watchlist. And another really useful method is just going to the fleet. If you already have at least one person on the watchlist, you can just drag their name to the watchlist window, which is really fast and a really good way of populating the watchlist. And this sort of a fancy thing you can do with the watchlist is why I like having only 14 people on the watchlist is if someone's tackling someone, like an interceptor or something, and they're really out of range, and you want to know if you should go rep them or not, if you should really burn hard after them, you can add them to your watch list, and that way you can see their shield armor and hull bars even if they're outside of your lock range. So I don't really like completely filling the watch list, but you can fill it to 15, sure. So the next part is going to be about channels, and I'm going to link a picture here. This is a picture of, this is a UI example of what I use as a UI. So obviously as Logi, you're in way more chat channels. If you're just flying DPS, you basically need the fleet chat and I guess local chat for shit posting. But you can also have, for example, the startup new broad channel open. But as Logi, you need a cap chain channel if you're in a Bazzi or an Osprey. And you should really be in Logi Brave. What you should have fleet chat open is, well, the main reason is getting like destinations. And if you lose a ship, you should write -1 ship type for the FC in fleet chat. So you should have that open. Logi Brave, ideally there's all Logi there and the Logi anchor is there. Sometimes some people only join the cap chain channel or like one of them. But if you have Ospreys and Bazzis, and Ospreys are only in the cap chain channels and Bazzis are only in the Bazzi channel, and the Logi anchor is, for example, in a Tengu or something, and he needs to write something or relay something that might get lost in fleet chat, then it's going to be a problem if people are not in Logi Brave. And sort of the same thing happens like vice versa. If people are writing some crucial information in Osprey chat or basic captain chat and the LC can't see it, then you as a random Logi pilot might want to call it out or like read it out. Like if someone's not getting cap from someone, well, cap is really good to have, then you should just write it in a different chat or call it on comms that we're having cap problems, so we're not getting cap from this person, so the Logi anchor can help sort it out. or the persons might not be noticing themselves. Once a fleet is over, you should really leave the captain channels, so you don't need to be kicked if a new fleet pops up. But you can freely stay in Logi Brave. If you look at my UI, I've got like the captain channel and the local channel sort of in one edge, and Logi Brave and Fleet Chat in another place. I have a sort of a weird UI where my overview is, but I like having the watch list straight in the middle. I use 1440p screen with 125% UI scaling. Thanks. And you can see, if you look at my overview, I have it tabbed in Notepad. And Notepad is really nice to have open, and Note with easy access to Logi channels, so you can link Logi Brave in Fleet, you can link the caption channels, and of course all the propaganda. So I suggest having that a note with that maybe, or just a Notepad in easy access. Okay, so a bit more about the UI. A really helpful tip I find is having specific persons always in the same place in your targeting grid. On mine, you can see I have shattered on the top right corner. That's where I always keep the main DPS anchor. If I'm flying Logi, that's where I keep the Logi anchor, and then the DPS anchors are usually where Vargrin is on the second row down. And on the bottom row, I usually have my two captain bodies. So I can always look at a specific type of place on the screen when I want to check the distance. For example, if I'm off anchor, or how far I'm from the deepest anchor, or the captain symbols. Like, those should always be in the same place. So I like this composition. So I don't need to be going through finding where the exact person is. And I think the watch list and the broadcast windows should be relatively close to each other, because that's the two main things you need to keep in mind. And the third one is what is hostiles on your overview and in 3D space, to see if you're getting yellow boxed or not. So if you can keep them somewhere high visibility, then that's good. Okay, next part is about cap chains. So what I already mentioned is calling out if cap chain is down. Logi Anchor usually doesn't have, or sometimes doesn't have, time to do it himself. And sometimes people might not know or notice that they're capturing correctly, like they might have one capture on the Logi Anchor because they misclicked it or something. So you should draw attention to that. Then there's a bit about aggression. You might or might not know that aggression sort of travels through cap chain. So if one person in a cap chain aggresses, then everybody will be aggressed. So for example, a situation where you're sitting on a gate and a random frigate warps to the, or just jumps through, and your FC tells the light tackle or dictators or whatever to just frag the ship. If you get your drone out, if you're sitting there and you're cap chained up and you're just waiting because the gate was red, then you have the cap chain going. And if you as Logi decide to put the drone on the small frigate, or you try to maybe repair one of the light tackle that's fighting it, then you're going to get all the bases or ospreys or all the ships in your chain aggression, which is pretty bad if you want to jump through right away. So you should hold off on that. What I quite like doing in some other Logi anchors as well is while you're traveling, you cap chain on gates and you cap chain on alliance, which is really good for checking if the cap chain is working, if people are getting cap from the correct persons. So I suggest doing that as well. Sometimes if the fleet's moving really fast, like for example if it's Caracal fleet with ospreys, then you don't really have time to do it on alliance, and sometimes on gates. Or sometimes if it's just been a really long op and we're burning like 10 jumps through empty space, then I might say that, okay, let's not do cap chains on alliance and stuff. Or if the fleet gets split up and some people might have their cap bodies on one side of the gate or someone's dropping off, then I might say no, don't let's not do that on alliance, but generally it's really good to have that ready and sorted. There's a couple of types of cap chains we do. We mainly do one up, one down, because that's sort of we have two cap reppers and cap transfers, I mean, and it's a sort of a good way of mitigating the risk of getting your partner ECM'd or killed off, because then you still have one cap body. And bases with Logify are perfectly fine with only one cap body and everything running, but it's still good to have two, one as a backup. We do something called combat cap, which is when we switch to one down and use one up for cap broadcasts. For example, Ferox fleets, I think if you're shooting and you have hardeners on and you don't really have perfect skills, then the Ferox isn't really cap stable. Especially if you're not, for example, staggering your hardeners for more cap. Then in bash fleets, we quite often see cap broadcasts from Feroxes. And they kind of need it, kind of don't really need it. Maelstroms and Hurricanes generally don't need it. But you can give cap to them. It's at least something to do during the bash because you can't reload your drones. The reason why we do one down for combat cap and not one up is because I think it was like this year, maybe around. No, I think it was last year, maybe before the summer, when we started pushing into ospreys and bases. We kind of just agreed we'll do one down, so we'll do one down. So just everyone would use the same thing. A different type of combat cap, well, overall cap thing is what Test does in Nightmare fleets with basilisks. They split ospreys and Basi 4 bases into one chain, and Logi 5 bases into another chain. So they can, and the Logi 5 basi chain only does one down. Because, well, they're stable like that, but Nightmares use lasers, which are really cap intensive, and they use ABs, which is quite cap intensive. So they do that because they need it, and it's kind of nifty, but we don't really have the Logi numbers to do dedicated one down basi chains, and we don't really need it because, well, our biggest doctrine, the Maelstrom doctrine, has Maelstroms which have capless guns, and Canes don't really need cap. And one thing is how to set up cap chain if you're tethered, and generally how to drop tether. Sometimes a fight starts out and you're still tethered on Astrahus, for example, and the enemy is like maybe 70 off, 80 off. and you kind of need to rush to get your cap chain going, and some people are still tethered, some people still aren't tethered. A really good way to drop your cap chain is, one is locking up the structure. Well, a good way to drop the tether is to lock up the structure you're on, or alternatively, if your links go up or your deepest starts shooting, then, well, FC is probably shooting then and detethered, then you can lock up FC, and then you can lock up your cap bodies. It's pretty annoying or situation if the first time you're trying out your cap chain is right off a detether. You should be quick to maybe go over some people in the cap chain to make sure the chain is at least somewhat working. And okay, one part about anchoring, which generally, well, I generally do keep at range 500. Some people do keep at range 1000. Some people do orbit. There isn't a really big difference, but it kind of depends on how fast you want to turn. If you can do nice, if you want to be able to align out the Logi, or you can do nice smooth curves in your flight trajectory, then keep it range is really good. But if it's, for example, a really messy grid or it's heavy tie-dye and you can't really, you can't really see where you're going. For example, one time I was basically stuck in a top-down view in 10% tie-dye. Then I think it's better to use orbit, because then people will at least have some transversal from orbiting when you're like doing 90-degree turns, or like maybe even U-turns because you have to. And a good thing to know about anchoring is when to break anchor. If you have, for example, target broadcasts on it, or you can read the grid well enough, you can see when the grid is no longer dangerous, when enemies are in full retreat mode and they aren't really shooting your ships anymore. Then if you see that as a Logi anchor, you can basically put yourself, you can burn in and put yourself between your fleet and enemy fleet to be close to, within lock range and rep range of your frigates and sabers. And you can do it on your own just by breaking tether, but you should be really sure that the grid is safe. Another part is drone selection. Drones, I think we used to mainly have ECM drones in our fittings or acolytes. And I think in the Osprey fit now we have armor repair drones. There's sort of a preference to what you want to do, and it depends on the ship. Bazzi only gets 5 drones, while a Simi gets 9 drones. I think a Soit gets 9 drones as well. In Bazzi's I like doing 2 armor drones, 1 hull drone, 1 horde drone, and 1 backup horde drone, because sometimes your warriors get bombed off. But if it's a small fleet, you might want to bring more deepest drones and ECM drones. ECM drones are great for getting interceptors off you. You can maybe sometimes jam them out. If you're doing a bash and you probably won't be at the damage cap, then sometimes I've just brought 5 hobgoblins. I think one time I brought even medium drones as a Simi. But it's mostly up to you. If it's like an Osprey, Caracal Osprey Moa feat, then you should fighting goons. You don't really need armor drones. But if you're staying on a structure and some tackle gets himself, or some bombs get someone to low armor, or even bleed a bit of hull, then it's good to have those at hand. So Mank's writing a question about not breaking capture, and I assume that's about burning off anchor. Capture has a pretty ridiculous range. I think Basis get like 60 kilometers on the cap transmitter range, so yeah, 66. So it's going to be pretty hard to actually go out of cap chain. I don't understand what the other question is about. Okay, so if you have any questions about this section, ask them now. So we're going to go on about some fleet organization, large anchor topics next. Okay, so from this setting, the first sort of topic is overview settings. You should have an overview tab that's like your general combat ones. I think you should have one that has only ships on it, so that's going to be a bit easier to scroll for yellow boxes. But you should also be able to see drones, to see if, and fighters, if those are aggressing you. But you can usually see those from the 3D space as well, but sometimes not. And for fleet organization, a really useful tab is friendly ships tab. If you're all undocked or you're all sitting on your first gate, you can sort by type or sort by name, and you can pick out which snowflakes are in Huggins, which guys are in Bazzies. A really important thing to pick out is if you have 6 Bazzies in your Bazzie caption channel, and you sort by type and you see that you have 8 Bazzies, then obviously 2 aren't in your cap chain or maybe aren't even on comms. And that's a really important thing for the FC to know. If the FC thinks he has, he can see the fleet composition from fleet settings, and he's like, okay, great, I have 8 passes, that's enough. But if 2 of them aren't actually useful, effective because they're not responding or they can't get in caption channels, then he should know that he doesn't actually have 8. We've had occurrences where someone was from another alliance and wasn't getting in the caption channels or comms for whatever reason, and I found someone else from DPS who could communicate to him from their corp chat, but like only their corp chat. So that was a bit strange, and a bit of a headache. But you should get those things sorted out. And on the same topic, if someone can't get in a channel, you or the Logi anchor, you should be able to make a channel quick and get the VIR migrated to the other channel. If you don't have operator in the caption channels, and for example, suddenly we have a new blue alliance in the coalition, or someone's like temporarily blue, you might need to have to make a temporary channel and get everyone in there. It's not really too hard to make one. I think you can make it like available to everyone, or just not password protected, and everyone can get in there via the link, and you can manually invite people in there as well. From a Logi anchor point of view, one thing I like doing is sort of the battle plan. What are we going to do when we land? What are the priorities? Usually the priority, if you're, for example, landing on a structure or landing on grid with a fleet, is to get the captain up, is to anchor up and pull range, and then, for example, lock up your snowflakes or get a drone on a structure or something. Sometimes if you're just bouncing between tacks or between positions trying to get a jump on the enemy, then you might only want to set up a cap chain, and you don't want people to start anchoring up. You should say like, okay, stay still, because you're probably going to bounce off to another attack because the enemy is going to warp into you. So if someone starts moving towards you or starts prop modding or already orbiting you, then they might miss the line, they might get caught. The same thing goes for ordering to pull range or to anchor up. If you think you're just going to be bouncing away, you should stay still. But you should always say people, you are usually doing the same thing. You're doing the cap chain up and anchor up and things, but at least for new people, it's good to go over that every time. Sort of a Logi anchor thing. That's not the Logi anchor thing because there's no Logi anchor is jacked-off fleets. FC doesn't really require one to volunteer, so you usually don't end up with one in jacked-off fleets. But someone should at least take over the spokesperson role who talks to the FC or talks to the fleet, because a big headache is if people start broadcasting for bomb damage. You should tell them to okay, only broadcast if you're below 50%. If you get no broadcasts, you should say, okay, only broadcast if you're below 75%. And someone should do it in Logi fleets. FC can do it, FC can say, but FC doesn't really know if you're still repping the 50% people or the 75% people, or you can, if you're not repping anyone, you can just say 90% or so. So should you always get the cap chain first and anchoring up? No, you should. Well, with Ospreys, the cap is a bit more vital, but if you're really too close for comfort to an enemy fleet, you should really prioritize pulling range. You can say anchor up, or you can just say, okay, if you know that, or if you can see that the enemy fleet is straight above you, you can say, okay, burn down, prop mode, and then chain up and anchor up. So not always. Sometimes the utmost priority is pulling range. That was for the recording, that was a bit out of the blue because that was a question from the chat. Okay, a topic related to the battle plan thing is the nice topic of dealing with FCs. FCs are your friends. They do so much organization and they very much create the content and they do so much work, but sometimes they make your life very difficult, and mainly if they just keep talking. The worst case scenario is if the FC has priority speaker, you don't have priority speaker, and you're kind of trying to sort out your cap chain on alliance, or you're trying to explain what you're going to do on land, or you're trying to explain some concept to a new Logi pilot, and the FC is talking about what he had for dinner. In that case, you should just shout out that Logi really needs battle comms or combat comms for sorting out things. Well, FCs need to put down their battle plan as well, but Logi sometimes it's a bit more of a boss. There's a bit more actions than just anchor up and start shooting, or like preload this, preload that. So you should treat your FCs nicely because they do a lot of work, but sometimes you should not treat them nicely. So that's the end of the fleet organization thing. Question from Fleet Chat: can't FC give priority speaker to LC? If it's a brave FC, they should have roles, and once we actually get our IT sorted again, then some random people, for example, I've asked for permissions to be able to priority speaker myself as well, but sometimes you have a test FC, for example, and they might not have priority speaker permissions to give out. So the ideal situation with or the setup with priority speaker is if it's a large enough fleet and FC is in command, without priority speaker. All the DPS is in DPS. Then Logi is in Logi comms, and Logi LC has priority speaker. And for example, if you have a cap wing in a cap channel, then the cap FC should have priority speaker as well. But the LC and the cap FC should mostly be whispering then. Sort of an annoying situation is if you have everyone in like Barrow main, for example, because it's like a rushed save fleet or something, or something that started from standing fleet and you're just moving to different comms. Then if it's like 20 people or below, then it's kind of fine to have everyone in the same channel. But if it's more than that, you should really move to Logi comms, and you should let the FC know that he should start shouting. And if you do that and FC shouts a bit, but then there's quiet for a longer period, you need to remind him that FC, are you shouting? You should be shouting. I guess the worst situation really is if you're all in one channel and the FC has priority speaker and you don't. Then if he talks, you can't really say anything about prop mods or things. But that's usually a small fleet, and people can just manual pilot, or maybe should manual pilot then anyways. Okay, so the next section is going to be the last one, and it's like a quick tip section. My number one quick tip is go on all MOA fleets, go on all character fleets. It's not T2 Logi, sure, but everything you learn in T1 Logi is going to transfer to T2 Logi. And T1 Logi usually has a lot more problems. Ospreys are easier to jam out because they have lower sensor strength, and Osprey pilots usually don't have gravimetric compensation skills. And it's those fleets are never bash fleets. They're always content fleets. And you're gonna get combat, you're going to get repping experience, you're going to get combat Logi anchoring experience. So if they go up, I suggest join every one of them. Logi, even T2 Logi gets, I think they get 25% SRP in front fleet SRP, so you can bring those to Feroxes and stuff. But T1 Logi isn't too expensive, and you can probably just ask for money if you are losing too many Ospreys. So the next thing I mentioned was, the next thing is suggested skills. These are useful, some of them are useful only in T2, but some are in T1 as well. The really big obvious one for T2 Logi pilots is having Logi 5. It's okay, it's a ×6 skill, but it takes like, I think it's 25 days or 26, 27 days if you're in a good remap for it. But if you're a really dedicated Logi pilot, you should really get it. And pretty much all, most if not all Logi 5 T2 Logi pilots that I've asked have it, at least the bases. It's more important for scimitars because bases are fairly cap stable with Logi 4 as well. But simis are not cap stable at all, even with Logi 5. And with strong mind flood and implants. So it's more important for devs. And it's if you compare it to like other doctrines, it's actually not that bad. If you're a dedicated Hugin pilot, okay, you're gonna get Trigon 5, which is about as long. If you're a dedicated Dictor pilot, you're gonna get Dictor 5. If you're a dedicated Scepter pilot, you're gonna get Scepter 5. But if you're let's say you're a dedicated DPS pilot, then T2 medium guns is a bit shorter than like T2 RT or T2 hybrid. It's gonna be a bit shorter than Logi 5. But for example, T2 large artillery is longer than that, and you're going to want to get all of those. So that's actually that's in chunks, but it's actually a much longer train overall compared to Logi 5. So it's actually, if you compare it to like smaller things, it's a long train. But if you compare it to what our deepest pilot with T2 guns on every ship needs, it's not bad. I'm gonna link the next two ones. So laser sensor compensation, gravimetric sensor compensation, these are really important skills for avoiding getting jammed out. You're still going to get jammed out because, well, they're good skills, but they're not amazing. But everything helps. I suggest you get both of them to 4. The later one is a bit less of a priority, especially if you don't fly Zoids and scimitars, because you don't cap chain, and if you get jammed out, it's not as bad as when the cap chain starts breaking. Which I really suggest getting those. And another skill you really want is linked is advanced target management. If you stay at target management 4, I think in an Osprey and a Scythe it's fine because you can lock up 6. But passes and scimitars with no mods, with no signal amplifiers in the lows, go to 10 lock targets, and for that you need target management 5 and advanced target management 3. And that's one of the best things I've chained up myself. It's not a requirement, but it's so useful. With the Passy, you're gonna have the Logi anchor locked up, you're gonna have the FC locked up, you have 2 cap bodies locked up, so that's already 4 targets. And if you only have targets mentioned 4 because you didn't want to train up targets mentioned 5, which is like 5 days, then you're only going to have 2 free target slots, which is not really much at all. But with 10, you can keep all kinds of, you can keep your best friend locked up and still have enough space for shuffling through Logi or Snowflakes or target broadcasts. A really short tip for frigate Logi is always overheat the cap booster. So the cap booster has the reload time and it has the sort of activation time. And if you overheat it, the activation cycle time is shorter. And you use it so rarely because the reload that it doesn't really generate much heat at all, so there's no reason not to overheat it. There's a couple of implants that are useful if you're flying scimitars or if you're flying passes with lower skills or auspices with lower skills. I'm gonna not link them because I didn't get the links ready, but I'll write them in fleet chat. So the EO60123 for capacitor region and the EM80123 for shield emissions. For what is EM? One sec, confused. Oh yeah, EM is the capacitor management. So those both basically improve your cap. There's another one, SE801, which is shield emissions, but that's actually worse than EM. Because they share the slot, you can't have both. And shield emissions only applies to your shield emitters, while EM applies to your hardeners and prop mode and your cap transmitters as well. So if you want, you probably need to import them. But if you want a fairly cheap, better Logi pod. You can have some EOs and some EMs. Another really good thing for boosting your cap is, of course, drugs. Mind Flood is an amazing Logi drug because it has four side effects. So the benefit you get is the capacity modifier, which improves how much total cap you have. But since capacity regen scales off of how much total cap you have, it improves both. And the downsides are shield booster penalty, armor repair penalty, and some gun skills. And the shield booster and the armor repair ones are local repair modules. So the low slot or the mid slot ones, and these don't apply to remote ones. So there's no downside to it, except that you need to buy it, but it's not expensive. So now I have a bit of mathematics. Let me pull up Python for a second. So okay, so a large shield booster, all the meta variants, I think, so on the semis and the bases, they heal 600 raw shield HP per cycle at optimal, so like 23 or 22 and closer. And for example, a stiletto fit with one medium shield extender and just astronautics rigs has okay resist, so it has more effective shield HP, but the raw amount of shield it has is only 1.6k, about, depends a bit on your skills. So it's 2.5 large shield booster cycles that completely reps a stiletto to full. So this sort of to illustrate how important staggering reps and frigates is, especially have multiple like scimitars trying to rep. I remember I tried, we had a Jaguar with a medium shield ancillary shield booster as the only tank module, and I was trying to keep that up. It was really hard, and it died because it has no buffer, and one shield rep cycle pretty much repped 2/3 of its total raw shield. So if you see like a stiletto on very low HP and you sort of want to hammer all your reps on it, you don't chill, relax, stagger them. A saber as a comparison with 2 medium shield extenders and no CDFE rigs has 3.7k raw shield HP. So that's a bit of a 6 large rep. So if you have like 3 or 4 T2 Logi trying to rep it, and everyone uses one cycle, he's pretty much gonna repair him all the way to full, and you can wait until he drops down again. So this was something I sort of wondered about, like, okay, everybody tells you to stagger reps, but how much should you actually do it? How important is it? And the second mathsy part I have is about how shield repper falloff works. So if you look at the semi-scoped repair, it says it has optimal 24 kilometers, and it says range within 73 kilometers. And at optimal, it repairs 600 raw shield HP per cycle. So it says range within 73 kilometers, and I want you to write in fleet chat how much do you think it repairs at 75 kilometers, so 2 kilometers beyond that range? So just write whatever you think it might be in free chat. Yes, 2 kilometers outside of fall off, so fall off is 73 and you're ripping 75. So we had two guesses. We had one for 100 and two for 0. And I measured it yesterday, and it's actually about 290. And I'm gonna link a diagram. So this isn't exactly the shield repper diagram because Python can't do it. This is actually a Vargor firing 1200 millimeter artillery phased plasma. But the fall of formula is exactly the same as for Newt, and it's similar. Well, the effect is different, but it's similar to guns. So it until optimal, it's just 100%, and then it like gradually linearly drops off until fall off. So, and at fall off 73, it repairs at exactly 50% efficiency. So actually, if you're trying to rep something that's really far away, like 70, I think the lock range on the sim is 75, then this came as a surprise to me when I calculated it, that you're actually way more effective than you might expect you are. You're at 40 kilometers, which is already way outside your optimal. You rep about 550 per cycle. The reason you don't want to really be at 40 or much further is because you might go out of lynx range. Command chips and stuff, I think they have like 50k-ish range or so. But if you have like a Drake alt for boosts and you don't have wing command, because I don't think you really need to level up wing command, you might have something like 25 or even less boost range. So yeah, that was a sort of really nice thing to know, I feel. If you're trying to burn after tackle, you don't really need to burn to 24k to them because you're going to over rep anyways because they have small buffers. But as soon as you can lock someone, you can rep them. I think at double fall off, so about 120 kilometer, 130 kilometer, if you could lock that far, you would rep about 36, so like 6% per cycle. Because the scaling goes down, but yeah, you can actually really rep in fall off. If you look at the remote armor repairer, it has much more optimal range, but much less fall off. So they mostly rep in optimal, but shield reppers in that regard are kind of like autocannons, artillery that you can do a lot of work in fall off. Okay, so that was actually my last point. Do you have any questions about this section or general questions about these topics or other topics? If it's not related to this class, I'm going to stop the recording. Okay, so I'm not singing, so I'll stop the recording.